Well, good afternoon, everybody, and happy Thursday. Man, that intro gets me every single time, and I'm like, ooh, and it starts to get me pumped up. And so,
yeah, I know. And in Spinal Tap fashion, I had the volume turned up to 11 over here. Awesome.
That's awesome. That's awesome. Brian, good to see you. Hey, Brian, how you been? You've been doing a little traveling, my friend.
Yeah. You know, they either traveling for events or conferences, or in this case, it was some PTO. No, it's been good. I had some time away during the holiday 4th of July weekend, recharged the batteries, kicked my feet up for a few days, kind of realign myself with what Q3 and 4 looks like. We're already halfway through the year. So yeah, no, you too, Tim. We were vicariously following you through what appeared to be a African safari jungle. So it looked like you were also traveling recently.
I was, and kind of anecdotally, like I travel a lot for conferences and stuff, but I don't ever travel a lot for like vacations and stuff. And one of the things that I always have a hard time doing is disconnecting when I travel. And this time I was kind of forced into being on airplane mode, no Wi-Fi, no cell, no nothing for very limited times throughout the day, which actually wasn't stressful at all. I figured I'd be like freaking out, and I didn't. It was actually kind of nice to like just about totally unplugged. I mean, out there in the African wilderness, all you have is trees and lions and monkeys and elephants. And so it was really good really good to disconnect. But, every once in a while when I had connection, I posted a picture or two. So as I'm saying that, my phone just came up with one of the lion pictures on my phone. If you wouldn't mind, I'd share a 2-second anecdote and I'll give up my intro. So it's July 5th. It's my birthday. Our guide wanted to do something very exciting. So she drove us out to the riverbank, and there was a pride of 12 female lions, lionesses, and one male lion just laying there. It was super cool. They were like 8 or 10 feet from us. They were, just kind of starting to wake up from the morning, doing, as you could expect, the cats rolling over and yawning and whatnot. And I was like, that's it. I put my camera down and I just sat back and I watched. And the female lion, the one that was in charge, the alpha, whatever they call it, locked eyes with me. And I was like, oh. And I just started watching. And she literally walked right up to me, staring me down about 6 inches from my face. She just kind of looked at me and was like, happy birthday, and walked away. And that moment was so surreal. It was amazing. But if you ever have an opportunity and be blessed like we were to have an opportunity to go see these things up close and personal, I would happy to provide you some insight. And yes, you're right, Tim. Mr. Schnur's over there. Yes, I did post it, but not a lot. So, Brian, how was your time over the last couple of weeks?
Busy, but all good. I'm banking on my PTO until September, going on a little adventure of my own, but going well. Just want to take a second. I'll segue into kind of intro, I guess, Tim.
Sure.
Longtime MSP owner and operator, compliance strategist, and currently serving as Chief Risk Officer here at Compliance Scorecard. I've spent the last couple of decades or so helping businesses build and operationalize security programs and really transform compliance into something that isn't a burden. It's a strategic asset. So excited to be here with y'all today, Tim and Ryan. Always good to connect and talk about this important topic, checklist to culture.
Awesome. Mr. Ryan, take a second, introduce yourself, and I will forego mine.
Yeah, here, Ryan Seymour here. I lead the consulting and education efforts at Connexecure. So my role is pretty simple. I help MSPs get into the cybersecurity space, specifically around vulnerability and compliance management, helping to reduce risk, helping to make cybersecurity synonymous with managed IT. So I've worked with hundreds of MSPs over the last 20 years as well, doing various consulting in and out of different various sizes of organizations. And, I think one thing is the same that we see, across all of the organizations is everybody likes to talk tech. So, we want to start to change that narrative around talk business, talk risk, talk training, document, and lead some education around that. So this kickoff today, we're going to get into a little bit of that. It's not just about check boxes, but culture and actually reducing risk. So we're going to talk about how we do that. I'm happy to be here as well.
Interesting that you mentioned checkbox. And we hear this, I don't know, dozens of times a day, and I'm sure you do too over there at Connexecure, Ryan. Like, can I just have a big scary report that tells me everything that they pass and fail on? Yeah, if you're selling on FUD, right, Brian? Like if you're trying to like dive into the like wrong way of being a true business and trusted advisor, right? Checkbox compliance is gone, right? We can't just give them big scary reports and kind of check a bunch of boxes and think we're done, because it's not that, right? And moving from those controls and those check boxes to something Brian likes to talk about, which is culture.
Yeah, thanks, Tim. And one of the biggest traps I see MSPs and their clients fall into is this mindset, right? That compliance is just a list of boxes to check, right? Policies get written, tools get turned on and deployed, someone signs something and boom, they think the job is done, right? But real security, real governance isn't found in the binder. It's found in the behavior, right? It's cultural. And that's where most compliance programs, from my experience anyway, fall short, because culture isn't something you can template or automate or outsource. So I've spent decades in this space, and I could tell you, if your users aren't thinking in terms of risk, Ryan mentioned it as well, you're not secure, right? When we educate people to be risk aware, they're not just rule followers. And I think that's when the shift happens. That's when employees reach out before something becomes an incident, right? That's when business units start looping security into decisions earlier. And that's when non-technical teams start asking smarter, better questions about risk. And that's when leaders actually seek your counsel instead of running away from you or avoiding it. And folks, you don't need fancy dashboard to see those signs, right? That's your signal the program is working, not because of a compliance score, but because of trust, buy-in, and real behavioral change across your company. Now here's the thing. Here's the kicker. Most programs don't measure any of that. Why? Because it's harder and more difficult to quantify, right? It's harder to automate and impossible to fake. But that doesn't make it, in my opinion, it doesn't make it less real. It makes it more valuable. So if you're not seen as approachable or helpful, or like we talked about earlier, enabling the business, it doesn't matter how many controls you check. I said it in a post earlier today, I'll say it here. Culture eats controls for breakfast, right? Always has and always will.
Awesome. Brian, thoughts, my friend?
Yeah, I mean, it's a pretty simple concept, and I don't know that there's any other easier way to say it. I want to keep it short and sweet. Brian's the expert in that space. I think he says it very masterfully if you follow his posts. This is a culture building moment for companies, in my opinion. And I like to say tools don't drive success, people do. And when we're saying success, governance, compliance, to get success there, it's not the tools, because tools are the tools, right? It's the people that you have to get involved and build a culture around security, and a culture around cyber awareness, and a culture around now AI awareness, right? That to me is where the success starts to take place, when you get your people involved. And it's got to be everybody, and you got to challenge yourself. Challenge yourself how the MSPs are thinking about training, documenting, and scaling those kind of security practices, right? Internally with your own people, it starts at our own place first. I think we got to check ourselves, and then we check the customers the same way, right? It's a culture shift. We're definitely going to have to talk tech, but I challenge you to start changing the vernacular around this, because it's not about tools and checkboxes. I think there's a lot of great tools out there that can help, but it really takes leadership, and it takes, I think, the people and process component to really take you over the success. So that's where I would be focused at.
Love that. I'm reminded, and you've probably heard me talk about this in the past, the cultural aspect, right? When we were handed, or I was handed back in my MSP days, NIST 853, you will do all these things. Big bad Mr. No came in, right? And I just started locking stuff down and kicking people out, and big bad Mr. No, because we had to follow these requirements and we were going to lose $5 million a year and blah, blah, blah. Well, I had people literally standing in my door, yelling and swearing and screaming that they couldn't do their job and all the things. And the lesson that I learned there was I needed to start and help the company and the end users understand the why, right? Understand and build that, not just from a top down, but almost from a bottom up perspective, right? Hey, Mr., Mrs., whatever researcher, you can't go and build access databases with built-in macros and Python scripts. By the way, we have a dev department who you pay to do that. You shouldn't be doing that yourself. So one of the biggest lessons I had to learn was to bring everybody together, sit them down, either virtually now sit them down and explain to them, hey, listen, we have this contract. This contract says we need to meet these requirements. This contract pays your salary and your salary and your salary. And if we don't do these things, the contract goes away and you're all unemployed. Now, as they started to understand that why and build that buy-in, the culture started to shift. So that every time they wanted to do something, now they understood, hey, is this going to affect me and my job and the ability to actually get a paycheck? Starting at that top and even at the bottom and kind of working that back and forth and having the conversation with the people on, this is the business outcome. If we don't do this, we lose $5 million a year and you lose your job. That was what I really had to learn as an IT professional, getting away from the ones and zeros and locking stuff down and big bad Mr. No, to having a business and a risk conversation to help shift that culture.
Yeah, I love that. Department of No to the Department of How and Department of Why, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Brian, have you seen that happen in your experience along the way, being a CISO and whatnot? Where have you seen some of those actually either work really well or the struggles? How can we help explain our MSP audience here listening today?
Yeah, I think for me, it comes down to mindset, right? Mindset, behavior, culture. So it's how do we get away from some of the checkbox mindset? And let me tell you, I can spot checkbox compliance a million miles away, right? The big red flag is when the only reason, for example, they want MFA is because cyber insurance told them to. No conversation about risk, no concern for protecting users or data, just check the box so we can get the coverage. And look, I get it, right? Insurance is many times the loudest kind of driver in the room. It's what I call a forcing function. But if that's the only reason a control gets implemented, you're missing the point, right? You're not building resilience at that point. You're building compliance theater. You're reacting to outside pressure instead of taking ownership of risk. And this is where I challenge MSPs to kind of elevate that conversation. When a client views security as an obligation instead of an enabler, that's your cue. A light bulb should go off. And that's your window. That's your opportunity to lead, right? You've got to reframe that narrative from fear-based compliance. We talked about FUD. Tim mentioned FUD earlier, but from fear-based compliance to kind of a trust-based culture, because real security doesn't start with a control. It starts with a belief. If users and business leaders don't believe MFA protects their people, their clients, their revenue, they're never going to champion it. They'll tolerate it at best, and they'll disable it if the second it gets in their way. We've all seen that. The executive walked down the hall and says, "I don't want to do this anymore. Get rid of this MFA," because they feel it's an obstacle, right? So we have to move from just enough to get the insurance discount, or just enough to actually, move that to just enough to actually reduce risk. So that means education. That means things like context. That means helping people connect the dots between security controls and business outcomes. So don't just check the box. Teach them why the box exists in the first place. Exactly what Tim was just saying. And that's leadership.
That's awesome. That's awesome. Ryan, what do you think, my friend?
Yeah, that's well said. And like Brian said, the checkbox, you can usually spot it. And I tend to find that it comes from, Tim, you're probably going to love this too, is any MSP that I consult with, and we're talking vulnerability management, we're talking compliance, we're talking risk. One of the things that I just love to start the conversation with, which to me is that base of that pyramid to success, is what's the vulnerability management program and policy say, right? Like that's where the checkboxes should come from and support. Right? I don't know what checkboxes to check. There's 1,000 checkboxes I can come up with that relate to 1,000 different controls and settings on your computer. But which ones do we actually care about? And I think having alignment with your policies, your program, and ultimately a framework, a standard, a regulation, whether that is coming down from a regulation or a governance, that's the easy one, right? Somebody said I had to do it. Easy. Those checkboxes usually get pretty easy. It's the ones that are doing it on their own and being proactive. I think the MSPs that are being proactive and aligning themselves to a framework like a CIS, right? And then building a vulnerability management program, building a governance program around it. I think that's where I would be starting when I think about those checkboxes. But there's a lot of different personas of MSPs out there too that are dealing with lots of different conditions in their businesses and their markets, right? Most MSPs that we're talking to, they're juggling tons of tools and tickets, right? I like to say it, tools and tickets. All of our MSPs out here know what I'm talking about. And
yes,
I think you have to make the GRC, the govern function, that needs to be everyday workflow, everyday process, everyday culture. Otherwise, it just gets ignored. Mm-hmm. And then what you have is people walking around. For example, I've seen MSPs that have passed SOC 2. They have compliance certifications, and their user still clicked on a phishing email.
That happens,
right? I mean, it still happens. So, yeah, you gotta get away from the checkbox. And again, for me, it's consistency, it's repetition, it's culture, it's every day. It's the same as me waking up and brushing my teeth every day. Right? I'm going to treat the policies, the procedures, and the why every day I start my day. I like to do that. There's the great book by Simon Sinek, right? Start with why. I like to thread that into everything I do. This is no different. So I'll leave it at that.
Let me throw this out there. All right. I'm going to put me down. I'm going to put Brian up and Ryan up, and hopefully I can do this correctly. And I want you to like rapid fire back and forth if we can. Tell me some signs of MSPs or their customers be stuck in checkbox compliance mode. Now, let me see if I can do this. Let's see if I do this layout and I remove me and I do this. That ain't gonna work. I was trying to put the two of you up side by side. No, that ain't gonna work. All right. Well, let's just have the two of you up here side by side.
Yeah.
Give us examples of what you have seen of checkbox compliance mode. Brian.
Just tell me what to do.
Ryan.
I passed SOC 2. We just got a phishing compromise.
Brian. Come on.
Send me the spreadsheet. All I need is the spreadsheet.
There. Ryan, one more.
My customer has an incident.
So
that's the worst one.
Yeah, my customer has had a breach. They'll use the B word.
Yeah, the B word. That's right.
Right.
Yeah.
So this whole mindset of checkbox. I mean, shit. We even named our dog, who's a boxer, Checkers. Damn it. So moving away from that, I need a spreadsheet. I'm SOC 2. I have wait, hold on. I have AV. I must be good, right? I did a scan. I must be good. All of those things, I'm not trying to discount them. They are important. They are part of a compliance program. But a compliance program isn't, do you do a thing? Yes or no? That is just one small piece. Mr. Seymour, you hit the nail on the head a little while ago. It is around that govern function. It is around, as Mr. Blakely said, having those business enablers and those business risks and outcomes so that everybody knows this is why we're doing it. Not so that I can get a SOC 2. Who cares? Not that I can give me a spreadsheet. Who cares? Right? Speaking of SOC 2, we had a little bit of a scenario kind of ploused out here, right? Policies and procedures, right? Part of SOC 2, ISO, especially CMMC, right, Brian? So policies and procedures, great. What is the industry as a whole doing right now with policies and procedures? Even us. Well, maybe even us. What happens? What do they do? All right, I'll answer. Oh, go ahead, Ryan. If you have an idea, what happens with policies and procedures today?
Like I think I said it earlier, and it gets ignored. I think I've heard people call it shelfware. People have intent in their program and their policy written down. They pass the certification. They pass the awareness training. I got my little badge that said I completed it. That doesn't mean you're operating securely. I find that most end users that have even done awareness training don't even know what they've passed.
Yeah.
Right. And that's not actually reducing risk. That's like liability with a ribbon, kind of.
Yeah.
And I think that unless you're mapping risk back to your program and your policies, again, I think it's paperwork. Compliance is paperwork.
Yeah.
If you're not mapping it to business risks, using it as an opportunity to have those strategic conversations with your customer about reducing risk and creating a risk culture, as opposed to just, again, having a stack of paperwork that said, I did some things.
Can I share what I hear most often in the wild and for a long time about policies? And I hear this from MSPs. I hear it from you all the time. Things like, our clients aren't engaging with the policies, or they won't read them, or they won't sign them, and they definitely don't want to talk about them, right? I think we've all kind of been there. And my response is always the same. Are you tracking comprehension or just completion, right? A signature on a policy is not understanding, right? A checkbox is not buy-in, right? Modern tools go way beyond like the signed and dated things on the policies, right? They tell you who actually understood the policy, who failed the quiz, who didn't even open it. That data is gold because it tells you where your accountability gaps are. We talked about governance, we talked about accountability gaps, right? And where you need to lead more intentionally here, right? If clients are resisting policies, treat that as a signal, right? Not as a stop sign, right? It's usually because the content feels irrelevant. The content of the policies are disconnected from their day to day. And I think that's an opportunity. Start with policies that intersect like real world behavior, right? And how they handle client data, or what they do to get what do they do when they get a suspicious email, or how do they manage passwords? Make it real. The goal isn't policy for policy's sake, words on a page, right? It's to create kind of a baseline of behavior that protects the business. If you can show your clients that policy isn't paperwork, like what Ryan said, that it's protection, they'll start to engage. And once that cultural shift starts to happen, it builds momentum, right? Engagement leads to ownership, and ownership leads to accountability. And that's how you move from ignored shelfware PDFs to, in my opinion, real impact.
I love that, and hey, we do it too. Here's the document, push it out, have a person sign it, check, move on. And I think that's part of, the cyber insurance. Everybody's talking about, the identity, the end user, training them, getting them up to speed. But we're not really doing a great job of policy. Why do we do a thing, right? That's the definition of the policy. Why do we do this? SOP, how, right? Standard, what? Why do we do this? And all we do as IT professionals, as HR professionals, heck, I'm not even talking cyber insurance, cyber security. Let's just talk employee handbook or any of that other HR. Like, we just give them a document, they don't even read it, and they sign it and they're off.
Yeah, that's dangerous, Tim.
It is.
That's dangerous. Talk about compliance risk right there. Most of the policies I see that people go rogue and find and replace off of policies that they find are dangerous, right? They've created policies for the organization that nobody understands they even exist, follow. The business can't even begin to resource them, right? There's a bunch of stuff that they can't even begin to do, right? And that creates a dangerous gap between this is what we say and this is what we do. And that'll get you in big trouble, right? Have a bad day. Your cyber insurance brings the cavalry in. They look for ways to limit their liability. They're going to ask for your policies. Now you've created a ton of risk because the policies say one thing and what you're doing in practice is completely disconnected. You can never begin to even operationalize or show any evidence or artifacts that the controls in there are operational effective. It's crazy.
Yeah. All right. I know we're coming up on our last couple of minutes here. We always like to, leave with a key takeaway from each of us. Helping to shift away from checkbox mentality into a culture of secure first, business risk first, understanding why we're doing those things first. Ryan, I'd like to give you a minute or so to talk about your key takeaway for today.
Yeah, so I think that the big thing for me is you're not going to win with you're not going to win this with automation. You're going to win it with engagement from your customer, and the rollout of these services and this strategy is not completed until you've seen behavioral changes happening. So I want to just focus on the do culture. It's about the people, the process, and then I think the tools come last. So again, I would encourage the MSP leaders out there, right, to start connecting the policy to the risk protection and risk reduction that you're serving. That's the intent of it. And the page out of Brian that I learned from Brian from working with you, Brian, is leadership intent. I think that's one of those key ingredient components to your policy that tie all this together. So our CXO positions and our chief X officer leaders out there that build this strategy, again, I think it's in their responsibilities to connect the policy to the protections. get your people engaged, get your customers engaged, and observe behavioral changes. And I think you'll have tremendous success in this space.
Awesome. So, Brian, my friend, key takeaway for today.
Yeah, lots of good stuff today. And I'll close with this. Real compliance culture is built when policies aren't just signed, right? When they're understood, applied, and measured. So if you're not measuring cultural impact, you're not measuring success. And this is where MSPs have a chance. I sincerely believe this. MSPs out there, you have a chance to do something different, something better. We've spent years convincing ourselves that deploying the right tools or passing the right audit is the finish line. And in reality, that's the starting block. Okay. Clients don't need more blinking lights and white noise, right? They need more clarity, more confidence, more connection between what they're doing and why it matters. So think about the opportunity here. You're not just installing software, right? You're shaping how people think about risk. You're guiding how organizations respond under pressure, right? That's resilience. You're showing them that security isn't just a department or a department of no, as Tim shared. It's a shared responsibility, and I think that's powerful. The most effective MSPs I've worked with over the years don't just maintain infrastructure, right? They influence behavior. They become that almighty trusted advisor, not just tech providers. And that trust is built when you help clients stop chasing checklists, right, and start building habits. Because at the end of the day, I believe security and compliance aren't products you install, they're practices you instill.
Mm-hmm.
And the MSPs who understand that are the ones who will lead the pack.
I love that. I love the practices you instill, right? You know, as I alluded to earlier, I came into that, back in 2006 with my checklist. NIST 853, FedRAMP moderate, checklist, lock it down.
Dr. Draconian.
I came into it with tools and tech and big bad no. And I had to stop and pivot, or else I'd have more people yelling and swearing at my door, whatever. So I had to stop and I had to pivot and I had to actually talk to the key stakeholders. I mean, all the way down to the clerical staff. They're, by the way, extremely important as well. And I had to have the hard conversation of why do we do this, right? And here's the thing that happened. As I started to explain the why, and as they started to get like, oh, I can't do that. Right. We have a department that, like, as the end user base started to get bought in, anytime as an MSP or the IT person, I wanted to roll something out, all I had to do was be like, hey, we're doing this thing. It's going to cost this much and it's going to affect you this way. What do you think? I would always get the yes, because I would tie that back to the business risk and the business outcome of, if we don't do it, we lose our contract, you lose your job. The point being is, when you can start to shift that corporate culture by having a conversation around the why and how does it affect, Johnny Lugnut trying to, make some steel lug nuts in his data, Mr. Joe sweeping the floor. When you can relate it and talk in the terms that they can understand, everything else gets easier. Within the first 18 to 24 months of rolling this stuff out, you know what our ticket count went down to? 5 a week on average. Anytime I needed to do something tech, security, whatever wise, I always got the yes, as long as I had budget. So how do you move from checkbox to culture? You have a conversation. So we're 4 past our minute. Next session is coming up July 31st. Oh my gosh, where'd the summer go? into something that's pretty dear to Mr. Ryan over there. Hold on, let me pull this up real quick. Join us on there we go. This is what I want on the 31st for strategies for identified vulnerabilities. Something very dear to Mr. Ryan's heart. So we will see you in 2 weeks' time. Do the like, follow, share, comment. Head on over to mspthoughtleadership.com and see our upcoming schedule. Watch any of our previous episodes on the podcast. You can now listen on your favorite podcast device, all the things. Brian or Ryan, any last 1 second or 2 second words?
No. Good to connect again, and look forward to talking vulnerabilities next week or 2 weeks out, and connected with everyone before end of month. So appreciate the time.
Awesome. Yep. Hey, have a great rest of your summer. Thank you very much. We'll see you on the flip side.
Bye, everyone.
Subscribe now.